It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the Gigabyte AORUS FI27Q-X. As usual for video review, what you see depends on my camera, depends on the processing done by my video editing software, depends on the processing done by YouTube, and ultimately, and very importantly, it depends on your own screen that you're viewing the video on, so in no way does it accurately represent what the monitor looks like in person. This video review accompanies a written review, and you can find a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do. Although I like to focus on games in my testing, remember that the examples I show you with things like colour, contrast, they apply outside of gaming as well. I just use games as a sort of vessel to show you certain things, but you'll observe the same kind of things if you're just watching Netflix, watching YouTube, browsing the internet, that kind of thing as well. This monitor has a 27-inch screen size. It uses an IPS type panel from Sharp, and that has a 2560 by 1440 WQHD or 1440p if you prefer resolution. It also has a 240Hz refresh rate. This gives you a good amount of desktop real estate, so it's good for multitasking and that kind of thing. It also gives you a good level of detail and clarity to suitably high resolution image content and to text and that kind of thing. In terms of text clarity, some of you will already be aware, but this model actually uses a BGR, that's blue, green, red subpixel layout, rather than the more standard RGB, which is used in the vast majority of monitors, red, green and blue. I go through this in some detail in the written review at the start of the calibration section, so I definitely recommend you check that out for a detailed analysis of what this means. But the long and short of it is this: it's not something which the vast majority of users will actually notice, they'll have any issues with at all. Of course, there will be some users who do have issues with it. I don't want to take anything away from that, but I do want to stress again that it isn't something I'd worry about. And the main thing that most users will have to do, most users will be using ClearType, most users using Windows will be using ClearType, and by default that optimizes to the RGB layout. You need to configure that so that it is optimized for BGR instead. So if you just type ClearType into the start menu, into the Cortana box, whatever you want to call it, you can then press Adjust ClearType. If you've got multiple monitors connected, you can actually select just the Gigabyte AORUS FI27Q-X, and that's the one you want to change. Again, if you look at the start of the calibration section of the written review, I actually show this as a screenshot. At the moment, I don't have multiple monitors connected, but if you do, you can select so you're only changing the ClearType performance on this monitor rather than for the other one, which unless it's the same model as this, it's probably going to be RGB. But the most important thing is the first option here, the first set of samples. Select the second one. That will tell Windows that it's a BGR layout you've got, and that's going to look best, and that will adjust a lot of things. It'll get rid of most of the fringing you'll see. There are still some examples of fringing, but when I talk about fringing, it's actually a very thin fringe. It's only a couple of pixels thick at most, and the pixels on this monitor are tiny. So when you look at people's photos, including my own, I have to say, and I do mention this in the written review, that show this fringing, it really does get exaggerated on those pictures very easily. And be aware that if you can see the pixels on the image, it's because the image is enlarged quite a lot. You're not going to see such a thick fringe to your eye in practice when you observe the monitor. For the rest of the ClearType samples, it doesn't really matter what you select too much. It's just according to your own preferences. The monitor has a DisplayPort 1.4 port with HBR3, high bitrate 3 technology, and that means that it can support a 10-bit signal at a high refresh rate using the native resolution, and it can have HDR active at the same time, it can have adaptive sync active at the same time. Just be aware that if you're running at 240Hz, you can't actually use a 10-bit color signal. You'll see it's not listed in NVIDIA control panel. I've checked with an AMD GPU as well. So you'd have to run it at 200Hz if you want to use a 10-bit signal under SDR. Once you've done that, you can select 10 bits per channel here, and it will be using a full range RGB signal as well, no chroma subsampling or anything like that. If you want to use 10-bit with chroma subsampling at 240Hz, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it. Most of the content you consume is 8-bit content, especially under SDR. There's only a very select amount of content which will actually be 10-bit anyway, but I do appreciate that some users will want to use 10-bit for work purposes, and you can certainly do that. but you just have to have the monitor set to 200 Hz or below. If you're using HDMI, I think you have to have it set to 60 Hz. If you look at the specifications section of the written review, it actually goes through various different combinations of refresh rate and even resolution with HDMI and also with DisplayPort and what's actually supported in terms of bit depth. Under HDR, I actually wouldn't worry about it at all, and that's because if you are running at 200 Hz or below, again with DisplayPort, then it's going to be using a 10-bit signal. The monitor's going to be handling everything itself. But HDR always uses a 10-bit signal. It's just that if the monitor can't handle the dithering stage, so it's 8 bits on the monitor, and then the 2-bit dithering stage can be offloaded to the GPU, that's fine. It actually works very well. I've used it not just on this monitor, but lots of other monitors that will offload the dithering to the GPU at some refresh rates to save bandwidth, and the actual difference it makes to the image, it's negligible, it really is. I mean, you'd have to be looking at very specific content, you'd probably have to be doing a side-by-side comparison, and then you would notice really very subtle differences. So don't obsess about this, don't worry about running the monitor at 240 Hz under HDR, or in fact SDR really. It's just for those that want to work with 10-bit content under SDR, then you would want to have it running at 200 Hz or below. I'm now going to talk about the external features of the monitor. So from the front, it has quite a gamery look. It's got some sharp angles, especially on the stand base there. The stand base has a black powder-coated metal finish, and the powder-coated metal is used at the sides and also the back of the stand neck as well. The bottom bezel is matte dark grey plastic, and it has a central AORUS logo. The AORUS logo has a slightly shiny finish, but it's actually quite well blended. It doesn't really catch the eye or anything like that. Below that, there's a power LED, and there's also a little joystick that controls the OSD. That's all explored in the OSD video. The top and side bezels have a dual stage design, so that means there is a slender panel border that's flush with the rest of the screen. When the screen's off, as it is now, it blends in quite seamlessly. You can see that as a border around the image when the monitor's switched on, as you see elsewhere in the video. And then there's a slim, hard plastic outer border around that. The screen surface has a light to very light matte anti-glare finish, that's how I'd classify it. This is quite a bright room, so you can see some reflections. They're not really sharp reflections like you'd get on a glossy screen, but the glare handling isn't quite as strong as it is on some matte screen surfaces, but it's better than others, so it's quite decent in that respect. But the light to very light matte quality of the screen surface enhances the image compared to stronger matte surfaces, as I explore elsewhere in the review. From the side, you can see the fairly robust stand design. The screen itself is fairly slim, but it does bulk out centrally, and the stand goes back some way beyond that. So in terms of the depth, the monitor does take up a fair amount of desk space, but it isn't the deepest design I've seen, especially for a gaming monitor. The stand also offers good ergonomic flexibility, so you can tilt the screen backwards and forwards a little bit. You can swivel it left and right a little bit. And you can adjust the height. You can also pivot it 90 degrees clockwise into portrait orientation. And for those curious, that's the clearance in portrait orientation from the desk at the highest stand height. And that's the lowest stand height, so it goes right to the desk surface if you need it to. At the rear, it's mainly matte black plastic, but there are some glossy elements, and those glossy elements actually house the RGB Fusion RGB LEDs, and they're explored in the OSD video. So you've got some LEDs at the back of the stand neck, also on the wings there, and at the side of the stand neck as well. And these aren't particularly useful in my view because they face the wall most of the time and you can't see an aura around the monitor. You can't use them as a bias light or anything like that. You can't really see them from the front, so they're not particularly useful. That's what those glossy elements look like when they're lit up with the RGB LED feature, and as I mentioned, that's explored in the OSD video. You can customize it in the OSD and using the Sidekick software. This is just one of the default static orange colors, and there are a few elements just at the side as well. And I was mentioning powder-coated metal for the stand. That's really for the stand base element. It's actually plastic that's used further up. The stand attaches using a quick release mechanism, so if you pinch those little buttons to the left and right of the stand attachment point, you can remove the screen from the stand. and that will reveal 100 by 100mm VESA holes for alternative mounting. The ports face downwards. To the left side of the stand neck there's an AC power input, which means there's an internal power converter, so there isn't an external power brick with this model. And to the right side you'll find the remaining ports. There's a K slot as well, just in the middle there. But as for the ports, there's the 3.5mm headphone jack, 3.5mm microphone jack, two HDMI 2.0 ports, and DisplayPort 1.4. So for HDMI you get up to 144Hz at the native resolution. It supports adaptive sync, specifically AMD FreeSync. For graphics cards and systems that support that, you also get HDR functionality. Via DisplayPort you get all of that, but you also get adaptive sync, which includes NVIDIA's G-Sync compatible mode. You also have the refresh rate capped at 240Hz rather than just 144Hz. There are then two USB 3 ports plus upstream, and for reference the upstream port, that's the one you'd need to use if you want to use OSD Sidekick, the software which I show in the OSD video. So that's what the port looks like, it's a Type B port. The monitor doesn't include any integrated speakers, just in case you're wondering. I'm on Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and I'm going to talk about contrast performance now. This monitor has an IPS type panel, so contrast is never going to be its main strength. Nonetheless, there is some variation in how IPS type models perform in that respect, and the static contrast of this one, it is around 1000 to 1. It depends on the settings you use. Under my test settings it was a little bit below that. So this is quite typical for an IPS type model really. It's what's specified for the panel. Some are a bit stronger than this and some are a little bit weaker. So it's not going to give you an inky depth and a great atmosphere for dark scenes when you're sitting in a dimly lit room, as I am right now. But you also have to be aware of IPS glow. That affects the atmosphere as well on IPS type models like this. And there's actually a bit of good news here, and that's that this one, it does have IPS glow, don't get me wrong, it certainly is a feature, it certainly is there, but it's a bit subdued compared to what I'd usually see on IPS type models of this size. So you can see it in the video towards the bottom corners of the screen more noticeably, and this would be true to the eye as well. Usually you'd be sitting a little bit above centre, but if you're sitting more centrally then you will see it towards the top as well, but it's generally more noticeable towards the bottom of the screen. And on this model it has a sort of rose coloured tint to it, but it doesn't extend as far out as it usually would. It doesn't eat away as much into the centre of the monitor, so it isn't as strong as it is on some models. I've lightened up the room now so it's not as dark as it was. There is a little bit of natural light in the room, so it isn't what I describe as a bright room, but it certainly isn't as dim as it was before, and now that IPS glow is really a lot less noticeable. You can still see it a bit, and if you're in a brighter room then it would become essentially invisible, although you will start to get some reflections on the screen, and you can see that a bit on the video, but that's just to make you aware that the IPS glow, it's more of a feature in a darker room. And the static contrast as well, as I said, it's not great. You know, it's around 1000 to 1. Not terrible, but not particularly impressive either. It certainly is nothing compared to a good VA model. It's quite some way off that, and it's not as good as some IPS models. And even in this lighting, if you compare the black of the bezel to the blacks that are displayed on the screen, the very dark shades, you know that there is definitely a lack of depth there, even in these kind of lighting conditions. As the room becomes brighter, that again becomes less and less noticeable. So it's mainly in dimmer lighting where this is the most noticeable. So this is why I always recommend, actually I recommend this with any LCD monitor, not just IPS type models, but if you can, do have decent lighting in the room. If you prefer to sit in a mainly dark room, then try to have some lighting behind the monitor, bias lighting, something like that. It can really help with perceived contrast. I've just adjusted the camera settings so you can see the light source there a bit better. That's because I want to talk a little bit more about these brighter shades and how they're represented on the monitor. The monitor has what I would classify as a light to very light matte anti-glare screen surface. This impedes the image a lot less than most matte screen surfaces actually, certainly stronger matte screen surfaces than this. It doesn't have the same amount of diffusion, in other words, and that means that the clarity, the vibrancy, that's all preserved better, and the screen surface finish as well, it's relatively smooth on this one, so it doesn't have obvious graininess. It has what I might describe as a very light misty graininess. This really is a very light misty graininess. Most users won't notice this at all. I'm sensitive to it and I don't find it bothersome, so really this screen surface is very agreeable. Moving on now to colour reproduction, and to start off I always like to use Lagom, that's lagom.nl, the website, and their tests for viewing angles. That's because these are really good tests for colour consistency as well. The Lagom text, it's nice and blended, good blended grey throughout. There's some slight red striping to the text, slight green striping in other regions, but there aren't strong shifts in saturation or saturated green or red areas that you'd see with TN or VA models. So this indicates a low viewing angle dependency to the gamma curve of the monitor. Next is the purple block, which is always represented really oddly in the video, I'm afraid, but to the eye it's a nice consistent pinkish purple throughout the screen. It doesn't have the kind of clear shifts between pink and purple, or a pinkish purple and a more bluish purple, you might say, more of a kind of violet colour perhaps, that you get on TN or VA models at different regions of the screen. The red block is a good rich red throughout the screen, very consistent, no complaints with this one. Green, it's a good saturated green chartreuse shade throughout, again very consistent. Perhaps a little bit of yellowing or a little bit brighter towards the very edges of the screen, but again not the clear shift that you'd get on TN or VA models. The blue block, as usual, that's a rich royal blue throughout the screen. And now for something a bit more exciting, or at least I think it's a bit more exciting, a black screen. Now it's not that, it's Battlefield 5. I'm going to talk about the colour reproduction using some in-game examples. This monitor has a vibrant look to things, and that's because the colour gamut is very generous. It offers a lot of extension beyond sRGB, especially in the green region. So if you look at the colour gamut, which I measured in the written review, you'll see that it actually quite closely corresponds to Adobe RGB. I measured 99% of the Adobe RGB colour space, a little bit of extension beyond that in some regions, but nothing dramatic. So actually the native gamut of this monitor is quite close to Adobe RGB rather than sRGB, and that gamut actually extends a lot more in the green region than sRGB. What this all means is that when you're looking at content like this is a game running an SDR, if you're just casually browsing the internet as well, most of the content you see, it's actually designed with the sRGB colour space in mind. So if you have a gamut that's wider than that, then you get extra saturation. Things don't look as the developers or the creators intend, it looks more saturated. Some people like this extra saturation and this more vibrant look, others not so much. It is worth being aware though that it isn't the same as if you have a digital saturation adjustment. So it's not the same as if you change colour vibrance in the monitor, so that's a saturation adjustment, a digital saturation adjustment. So what this does is it pulls shades closer to the edge of the gamut without expanding the gamut itself. So that does create extra saturation, but you also lose shade variety. Things really just get crushed together. That gives a nasty cartoonish look. So if you have the saturation achieved with a wider gamut instead, it's a very different look to that. There are also saturation sliders in the graphics cards. NVIDIA call it NVIDIA's digital vibrance control. That does a similar thing, but at the GPU level, has a similar effect though. It crushes things together. The colour gamut, it has some biases there. So the green shades are particularly luscious. There aren't any great examples of that here, but it's also worth being aware that some of these green shades don't really look as they should at all, and that's because of the massive extension there in the gamut. Some of the yellowish greens, like this patch of grass here, for example, the yellow components are brought out too strongly, and other greens, this grass here, for example, you see I'm making do with what I've got, and also the sort of scum on the water there, if you want to call it that. It looks a touch neon, really. It doesn't look as subdued as it should, and darker greens, sort of lush dark greens, tend to look more neon as well because of the colour gamut. Again, some people will just say, okay, that looks vibrant, and they'll like it. For other people, it will look less natural, so they won't like that look. It's sort of open to interpretation, really, and just everyone has their own preferences there. The colour gamut also extends in the orange to yellow region. So if you look at the gamut again, this will make more sense if you look at the gamut in the written review. But it doesn't have much extension in pure reds beyond sRGB, but between the green and red regions, so you've got your yellows and orange shades there, there's a lot of extension. So this fire here is incredibly vibrant, but the rich oranges don't verge on red, as you sometimes get with wide gamut models, especially if they've got more extension in the red region. And the yellows are very intense as well, and yellowish oranges and oranges. So that has a very vibrant look, but to some it won't look out of place because it kind of looks balanced and it looks fire-like, but I've never seen any fire in reality that looks quite like this. And again, you're not going to be able to see this in the video, it's going to look quite wrong on the video, but I'm just saying how things look to the eye. The wood of the rifle there as well, it's kind of orangey, too orangey. There are lots of autumnal reds and browns here, but they look more of an orange-red shade, and they can sometimes have a bit of a neon appearance, not in this particular scene, but just some reds, the balance isn't quite there because of the fact that it pushes so far in the orange region. Then again, I find on some wide gamut monitors that the reds are brought out far too strongly, and that will give lots of woods a sort of overly red cast. That doesn't happen on this model, but again, it's that orangey red which comes out too strongly, so it does affect the neutrality there. And the gamut also extends in the blue region, a bit beyond sRGB, and of course the blue region is a very broad thing. Again, if you look at the green to blue region, so that will include cyans, it will include light blues, that kind of thing. Sky blue here, for example. That looks more saturated than it should, although this is a kind of a greyish sky, so it's not so bad here. If you wanted to tone things down a bit, there is of course the colour vibrance setting. So if you decrease that a bit, it does take an edge off the vibrancy, but I find that some shades remain oversaturated and others start to become undersaturated. So it can actually be very difficult to get the balance right, but some people will still like this according to their own preferences. And again, some people will like it just natively, but if you want to reduce the vibrancy a bit, by all means try that. Another alternative is the sRGB mode of the monitor. It has an sRGB emulation setting. Picture mode sRGB. Unlike some settings of this type, you can actually adjust brightness, which is helpful. The image now looks a lot more subdued. Be aware though it does lock off a lot of settings such as gamma and the colour channels. So you can see there it's really in the picture section. All you can really change is brightness. In gaming you can adjust a few other things. You can certainly access the overdrive, for example. That's an important one, I know. But essentially I find this takes things too far the other way. The gamut itself, it corresponds closely to sRGB. There's just a little bit of extension beyond, very little bit, nothing really to speak of, and just a very small amount of undercoverage. I measured 99% of the sRGB colour space. So it's not bad in that respect. The gamma curve's a little bit off though. Because of that, and just some of the colour values, basically, it is on the undersaturated side. If you look at the colour reproduction section of the written review, Spider Checker 24, I give some good visual examples of this, and also the native gamut compared to how things should look. That's a really nice visual reference, a nice visual guide of this undersaturation and the oversaturation that I'm talking about here. But some people will prefer this look. What I would say though, that if you are using the monitor for colour critical work, then I would recommend, regardless of the colour space you're targeting, that you profile the monitor with your own colorimeter or similar device. You'll be using colour-aware applications if colour accuracy is important to you anyway, so that won't be a problem. They'll read your profiles just fine, and that will give you proper gamut mapping and other corrections. And it's also important to recalibrate the monitor over time because things can shift. Even if it's calibrated perfectly from the factory, that doesn't mean that's going to stay that way. So that's certainly going to give you the best edge in accuracy. That's something I'd recommend with any monitor, and I do appreciate that's not necessarily going to be an option, or people will want this sort of universal adjustment which is going to apply even in non-colour aware applications such as games, which are not ICC aware, so they won't apply gamut mapping from the ICC profile. So with that in mind, some people might like the sRGB setting, but the native gamut, very close to Adobe RGB, so it is good for work within the Adobe RGB colour space. And again, if you can, profile the monitor with your own colorimeter. That'll really give you the best performance in that respect. If you're interested in working within the DCI-P3 colour space, I measured a colour gamut of 94% DCI-P3 on this one, so there's certainly a bit of under coverage there. And again, because it's following Adobe RGB, there's actually quite a bit of over coverage in the green region. So you'd again want to be profiling the monitor if you can with your own colorimeter or similar device. But either way, there's certainly a mismatch between the DCI-P3 colour gamut and what this monitor provides. I'm back on Shadow of the Tomb Raider and I'm running the monitor and the game under HDR. This monitor is HDR10 compliant, and more specifically it supports VESA DisplayHDR 400, that's the level it's certified for. This is only a basic HDR experience, don't expect anything outstanding, but I still like to give a good run through of the experience because I know even at this level there's a lot of variation between how monitors perform, and some people will still like to use this monitor under HDR. So when you're running the monitor under HDR, there's very little you can change, very limited in terms of the adjustments. So you'll see that the picture menu is entirely grayed out. In gaming, some things are grayed out, some things, you can adjust things like the overdrive, you can have AMD FreeSync Premium, which enables adaptive sync on the monitor, so you can use HDR and adaptive sync at the same time. That's on both NVIDIA and AMD GPUs, you can do that. And if you go to the display section, it does say HDR at the top, just as a reminder, but you can't adjust the brightness. That's all handled automatically. Unlike some HDR implementations, there isn't a sharpness filter. I know some people actually kind of like the extra sharpness which some HDR settings provide. If you like that, then just increase super resolution. That's your sharpness filter, so you can adjust that if you want to. I prefer the more neutral look myself. Now, in terms of its brightness performance and its contrast performance under HDR, it's really very limited in that respect. So VESA DisplayHDR 400, that would require 400 candles per meter squared, and on my unit I measured a bit above that, but not dramatically so. So it doesn't really have the eye-popping brightness that some HDR models provide. It also doesn't have any local dimming. It just has the backlight controlled as a single unit. So if you look at this scene here, for example, there's really an intricate mixture of light and dark shades. I'm not just talking about the brightness there, but also the dark shades here. There's actually a mixture of darknesses. So the cracks in the rock there, the shadow detail, that's actually a lot deeper than the surrounding shades. But one thing that this monitor does do is it does use dynamic contrast under HDR, and that can be enhanced by HDR metadata to enhance the precision to the adjustments that it's making. And that does help actually, because if there's predominantly darker content like this, the backlight doesn't just stay on at full, and actually the IPS glow you can see, that is exaggerated. I have to say it's exaggerated on the video. I don't see it that strongly to my eye at all, just adjusted my camera settings slightly, but even so, I don't see it towards the top there to my eye like I can in the video preview screen. Anyway, it's helpful that it isn't pumping out its maximum brightness here, because there's really no need for it to be doing so when it's displaying this kind of content. So it gives a more atmospheric look than some, but really local dimming would help here. And although it's exaggerated in the video, yes, you can still see the IPS glow and a bit of a kind of slightly foggy look really in places. So it isn't perfect. Another advantage of HDR is that it supports 10-bit color reproduction, and I actually covered that earlier in the video, and as I said, it's either the monitor or the GPU handling the dithering there, but either way, it works well to enhance the nuanced shade variety. So the very dark shades here, there's actually a nice variety of these very dark shades, and it gives a natural uplift to the detail, which you won't get under SDR even if you adjust the gamma. It's just from a natural enhancement of the shade variety there. So that is helpful. It also has a nice effect for brighter shades, and I'll come on to that shortly. In fact, very shortly, why don't I just jump in this pool like I usually do? Here we are, hopefully. This particular scene here is one of my favourites on monitors which provide a really strong HDR performance, and that really isn't what you get here. So ideally, you'd have local dimming and you'd have a higher peak luminance than you get here. So the sun glint on the water there would be really eye-catching and just stand out beautifully well. It doesn't, although it's quite bright, it's not particularly eye-catching. And the light streaming in from up there as well. Again, kind of bright, but it doesn't really catch the eye in a beautiful and natural way as it should do. And also with local dimming, you'd get these dimmer shades. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to adjust my camera again because that looks quite wrong. The dimmer shades again would have extra depth, and it would be more focused on the shadow details there. So they look kind of a bit flooded really. But dynamic contrast again does its thing, and it does help. So when there's predominantly dark content as there is now, the depth is better. On some models, if it just stays at its maximum luminance, the brightness of the backlight, it can really give a very flooded look even to content like this. But with the dynamic contrast element, at least you don't get that. But you do have to be aware that the whole of the backlight is changing. That's what dynamic contrast does, according to the image being displayed and according to HDR metadata in this case. So the constant adjustments, I know that can bother some people, but personally I do think that it's preferable to have this versus the alternative, which will mean that all darker areas just look completely flooded. But again, local dimming and higher peak luminance is required for a proper experience here. The 10-bit color reproduction helps here as well with these brighter shades, so there's a nice variety of bright shades there. And again, you're not going to be able to see this in the video, and actually just looks like a big ball of light at the moment, but to the eye that isn't the case. There's actually a great subtle shade variety, which gives you nice smooth gradients there, really enhances weather effects, mist, that kind of thing, just particle effects in general. Really nice to have that. The colour gamut as well. I mentioned in the colour reproduction section, very good Adobe RGB coverage, but under HDR it's actually DCI-P3 that's targeted as the near-term gamut, and for the longer term the developers have their eye on Rec 2020, so you'd ideally have coverage even beyond DCI-P3. So this monitor does actually tick the box for the green region, and it represents the greens very nicely. Because the developers are now targeting these extended colour spaces, these green shades look vibrant, but they don't look overdone. So there are some really nice deep greens as well, and the yellowish components aren't brought out as strongly as they were under SDR, so they don't look off in that respect. And the orange hue that I was observing before is toned down here as well. So the browns look more neutral, and Lara's skin as well looks more neutral. I didn't mention before, but sometimes because of the extra orangey red appearance to things under SDR, some skin tones look quite off as well. They look kind of overly tanned or too pinkish sometimes. So it's good to have that looking more neutral. Just on a different scene, again, HDR's active, just for a little bit of variety. And there are some shades here again which really pop under HDR. These orange berries, for example. So the point here is that the more natural looking shades are there and they look appropriate, the saturation's toned down, but there are still vibrant elements where the developers want them, at least if the gamut covers that properly. It certainly does for the orange shades there, those berries there, or the fruits there, very eye-catching. These flowers, pretty eye-catching as well, not as eye-catching as I've seen on some models. And again, some of these shades would appear more eye-catching if there was greater coverage of the Rec 2020 gamut, so that's a bit ambitious for the moment, but you know, that is the long-term goal, and that's going to give you a really nice look to these vibrant shades. But really the overall representation of colours under HDR on this model, it's a lot better than I've seen on quite a few models actually. The generous gamut is helpful in that respect, but also the way that Gigabyte has implemented HDR is quite good. I didn't mention before, and I should really have mentioned this, I'm using an NVIDIA RTX 3090 at the moment. I've got the monitor connected using DisplayPort. However, I have tested with HDMI. Of course, this is important for games console users. They're not going to be using DisplayPort. And I also tested with an AMD GPU. And via HDMI, there weren't any significant changes to how the image was represented. On my AMD GPU though, I did have a strange green tint when HDR was active. I'm not sure what that was all about. It was moderately strong actually. Your eyes do adjust after some time, but it really shouldn't have been there, and it's not there on my NVIDIA GPU. I don't know what that was all about, but it does affect the neutrality. Unfortunately, I don't have games consoles to check with, so I don't know if that would apply there. Also, it could have just been an issue with my unit or firmware issue. Gigabyte does provide firmware updates which the users can apply themselves using the OSD Sidekick software, so perhaps that's something that could be fixed. I will bring it to their attention. With my NVIDIA GPU, the neutrality was very good, but just be aware that it is a bit annoying that under HDR you can't adjust the colour channels or anything like that, although it is very normal for those to be locked off. So really, I consider this one of the better VESA DisplayHDR 400 performers I've come across. Not the best, certainly not the worst, but really, for a true HDR experience, you need that local dimming, you need that contrast enhancement, and ideally you need the stronger peak luminance as well. I'm back on Battlefield 5, and I'm going to talk about the responsiveness of the monitor. This is a 240Hz monitor, and I've got the game running at 240 frames a second, or very close to that. You can see my frame rate counter in the top right of the display, so this means I'm making the most out of the monitor in terms of its responsiveness. So this 240Hz refresh rate, it brings some key advantages over lower refresh rates, but to really make the most of this you do need to be having a suitably high frame rate as well. So compared to a 60Hz monitor, or this monitor running at 60Hz, you get up to 4 times as much visual information displayed every second, and compared to a 120Hz monitor, or this running 120Hz, you get twice the visual information. This brings with it 2 main advantages. One is that it improves the connected feel, and that describes the precision and the fluidity that is felt when you interact with the game world or interact with your character. This is also enhanced by low input lag, and on this monitor there is a nice low input lag, a very low input lag level actually. I measured around 2.5 milliseconds, and that indicates a very low signal delay, which is the main element of input lag that you feel. The other advantage to this high frame rate, high refresh rate combination is that it greatly decreases the perceived blur due to eye movement. Perceived blur is a concept which is explored in detail in an article all about responsiveness on our website, and it's also summarised in the written review in the responsiveness section. I definitely recommend checking that out. It also includes some pursuit photographs using the UFO motion test for ghosting, so that's a really nice way of capturing the motion performance of the monitor and showing different overdrive settings, different refresh rates and the effect of that. So definitely check that out if you're interested. But essentially most of the perceived blur you see on the monitor is due to eye movement, and this is reduced as you increase the refresh rate and have a suitably high frame rate as well. Perceived blur is also influenced by pixel responsiveness, and this monitor performs very well in that respect. It puts in a good solid 240Hz performance. There aren't any major weaknesses in terms of its pixel responsiveness, only minor ones. So you can adjust the overdrive, which is the pixel response setting, in the gaming section of the written review. I'm using the balance setting at the moment. That is my preferred setting, especially at relatively high refresh rates. And with this, most of the pixel responses are rapid enough for a really solid 240Hz performance. In terms of the weaknesses, really what I'm talking about here is very faint, powdery trailing, as I like to call it. So behind some objects, there's just this very slight trail, really very slight. It sticks very close to the object. It's a lot fainter than the object itself, and therefore it doesn't have a dramatic effect on perceived blur, and the overall perceived blur remains very good. This scene here, it's mainly medium to light shades. There are some dark shades mixed in, but really the monitor is consistently good here. This powdery trailing becomes most noticeable for very light or very dark shades against contrasting backgrounds. So this wall section here, for example, this isn't necessarily because the pixel responses are slower for these transitions, but it can also be because it simply catches the eye more because of the visual contrast. But even that is not extreme at all. It's, again, what I describe as a faint powdery trail behind the object. It really is very short-lived. Once you stop moving, it very quickly disappears. I'd actually go as far as to say this balance setting at 240Hz, even competitive gamers are going to be very happy with this. Most competitive gamers are going to be really perfectly happy with how this monitor performs. But if you want to have a bit of an edge and just remove some of that powdery trailing, even though it is slight, then you can use the speed setting. I showed you the overdrive controls before. I've actually assigned them so I can quickly switch between them. So Custom 1 and Custom 3 on my monitor, exactly the same, but Custom 1 has the balance setting. Custom 3 has the speed setting, which is the fastest one. So I'm just going to switch over to that now. So with this setting, it does cut down on that slight powdery trailing. So there's a very slight edge you get in perceived blur, but it was really very good before, to be honest, as I already mentioned. I think most people are going to be very happy with the balance setting, but by all means use the speed setting if you want. The other nice thing is there isn't really, at least on this scene, there isn't really any strong overshoot even with this speed setting. There are some traces here and there which weren't there with the balance setting. With the balance setting, there's really nothing in the way of overshoot to complain about. There's really very little, if any. I mean, there might be some slight traces for some transitions, but just nothing that catches the eye. With this speed setting, actually for this scene it's fine. There's nothing which I'd call eye-catching overshoot, but there are some transitions which will cause greater overshoot with this speed setting, so I'll just show you some of them. I'm on a different scene now. I've got the speed setting active at the moment. My frame rate isn't quite 240 frames per second, but I do have the monitor running at a static 240Hz refresh rate, and for the sake of what I'm about to show you, this doesn't actually matter. I've observed similar transitions at a solid 240 frames a second, and the same kind of things are observed. So there is some overshoot. You might be able to see that around the flag there. I'm going to show you a better example, because this is often difficult to capture on the video actually, but I found some examples which do seem to come out nicely on the video. So the flag post there, for example, there's a bright halo trail. There's even more noticeable example here. So as you'll see, it's these flag posts which are really the main culprits here. That's because they have some very dark shades against much lighter, or medium to light I should say, backgrounds. So you should be able to see that overshoot quite readily on the video. It's brighter than the background, so it stands out. It's certainly brighter than the object colour. And around the flag itself, it has a little bit of a cyan, sort of slightly green tinge to it as well. So again, I prefer the balance setting because that gets rid of that. I'm just going to switch over to the balance setting now. It's completely gone now. There's not even a trace of that overshoot. The sort of transitions I'm showing you here with mainly these darker shades or dark shades mixed in. Even IPS models tend to struggle, especially ones with particularly high refresh rates. And that's because the requirements for an optimal performance are increased as your refresh rate are increased. So you do tend to get this powdery trailing, but it really isn't bad on this monitor. I mean, there is, again, a little bit in places. For example, the makeshift roof there, it often shows it, but nothing substantial. Again, just sort of what I describe as a very faint powdery trail. I usually see more of that up here actually as well. Not bad at all on this one. But the speed setting does cut this down a bit. I'm not going to switch back to it because you can't really see the difference in the video anyway, but to the eye, or to my trained eye, yes, I can see a slight difference, but I really do stress it's a slight difference, and this balance setting is very nicely tuned in my view. The monitor also supports adaptive sync, which I've now enabled. This doesn't change the pixel response behavior at a given refresh rate, but what it does is it allows the monitor to adjust its refresh rate according to the frame rate of the content, and in doing so it removes tearing and stuttering from frame rate and refresh rate mismatches. So ordinarily, without VRR, variable refresh rate technology like this active, you would see obvious stuttering, or obvious to me, or obvious to people who are sensitive to it, if you have VSync enabled, or you'd see obvious, again obvious to people who are sensitive to it, tearing if you had VSync disabled. So it's really nice not having those interruptions. So I do, and people who are sensitive to this kind of thing, they do definitely appreciate this kind of technology. And this monitor's adaptive sync support encompasses both AMD FreeSync Premium for compatible AMD GPUs and systems, and NVIDIA's G-Sync compatible mode on compatible NVIDIA GPUs, such as the RTX 3090 I'm using right now. Both technologies worked in much the same way. I tested both of them at a broad range of refresh rates. The only difference is the floor of operation is a bit different, and you can see the exact values in the written review in the G-Sync compatible mode section and the AMD FreeSync sections there. But just off the top of my head, it did go down to 48 Hz as advertised with my AMD GPU, or thereabouts. It sometimes seemed to be a little bit higher than that, but not much. With my NVIDIA GPU, the floor of operation, which is the lowest it will go down to, that varied depending on the static refresh rate you'd selected. So if you have 240 Hz selected, I believe it went down to 60 Hz. And if you had 120 Hz selected, it would go down to 50 or 52 Hz, I believe, and somewhere between those two with intermediate refresh rates selected. I wouldn't worry too much about this though. What happens when it wants to go below that is that there's something called LFC, low frame rate compensation, which kicks in, or that's what it's called on the AMD side, but it works in much the same way on NVIDIA and AMD GPUs, and it means that the monitor will stick to a multiple of the frame rate with its refresh rate where possible, and that will keep tearing and stuttering at bay as well because of the exact multiples there. And that does work very well, but when the boundary is crossed, there is a momentary stuttering, so you do have to be aware that if you are frequently crossing that boundary, that stuttering could become bothersome. But for most people, it's not something that I'd really worry about too much. I've significantly increased the graphics settings. You'll see that my frame rate is now closer to 100 to 130 frames a second. There is some fluctuation either side of that. And actually, this is the monitor's refresh rate display, or frame rate count, or whatever it is they call it. And that's a bit clearer than the little green text that came from the game that I was showing you before, so I just decided to keep this up instead. And again, it's doing what it should do. It's adjusting its refresh rate to match the frame rate of the content, which is fluctuating all over the place, and that gets rid of tearing and stuttering from frame rate and refresh rate mismatches. Very nice feature to have. Something to be aware of though is that it's now much lower than 240 Hz, and if I compare the connected feel, that's just not as good. If I consider the perceived blur levels, that's also increased. So the reason I'm mentioning that is that yes, if you're sensitive to it, you can notice an improvement going from say 120 or 144 Hz to 240 Hz, and you've got a suitably high frame rate. There is benefit to going higher than that. But what I would say is that the difference between being here and say 60 Hz is much greater than the difference between being here and being at 240 Hz. It is a case of diminishing returns. Nonetheless, I do like the edge, even going all the way up to 240Hz on this monitor. The other thing to be aware of is that this monitor doesn't support variable overdrive. That's something which is usually reserved, or at least is usually done properly, on NVIDIA G-Sync module monitors. So that's sort of full fat G-Sync monitors, if you like, with the proper module. But with this model, I've got the balance setting on still. I wouldn't say there's strong overshoot, but there are some more noticeable examples. And I don't know if these will come across on the video necessarily, but I can see some halo trailing behind the tree now. It's brighter than the background, so it does stand out a bit. But it's not strong, it's not extreme. And for that reason, I would just stick to the balance setting here. If you so desire, you could change to the picture quality setting, which I'm just going to do now. So this is the lowest acceleration level you'll have on this monitor, and it does get rid of the overshoot completely, but it also increases the powdery trailing. So it really isn't fast enough for an optimal performance even at these reduced refresh rates. And I say reduced, I know it's still quite high, but it is reduced compared to 240Hz. And really, I think at this kind of refresh rate, the balance setting is the best optimized. And the speed setting for comparison, the overshoot's now strong. This will definitely come across on the video. I'd be very surprised if it didn't. That halo trailing is very clear. And let's go back to the flag examples down here, which showed it very clearly. Now it's supremely bright, supremely strong. Up here as well, and you can see the colours around the flag from the overshoot now coming across very strongly. So that's really the big issue with the speed setting. Yes, at 240Hz or very high refresh rates, the speed setting was all right because the overshoot just affected a few select transitions really. And I say it's all right, I still preferred balance, but you know, some people would find the speed setting okay. But I think here you're now going to find it a lot more problematic. The overshoot's a lot more widespread and a lot brighter. I've switched back to my preferred balance setting, but I've increased the graphic settings quite a lot, and you'll see that the frame rate is now comfortably below, or uncomfortably below I should say, 100 frames a second, around 80 frames a second or thereabouts. The overshoot is now creeping in, even with this balance setting, more strongly around the flag there. You might be able to see this on the video. I wouldn't say it's super strong, but it does catch my eye for these transitions at least. And around the flag post there, perhaps a bit clearer actually. Again, it's sometimes very difficult to capture this properly on the video, but I can certainly see that it's become stronger. So it might be tempting instead to use the picture quality setting if you're going to be spending a lot of time below 100Hz. Because remember, it's the refresh rate that's important, not the frame rate. If you have the monitor set to a static 240Hz, then you aren't going to get extra overshoot just because your frame rate's decreasing. The overshoot behavior remains the same, but you will get that tearing and stuttering from frame rate and refresh rate mismatches instead. So the picture quality setting, the overshoot's gone now. There's a little bit of an increase in powdery trailing, but it's actually not too bad at this level. So for these double digits, the picture quality setting is actually, I'd say, adequate. It's really fast enough for a decent performance here. I mean, I would say there's a bit of an edge to balance, but I'd also say that the overshoot's probably easier to notice than any slight weaknesses with the picture quality setting here. I'm still using the picture quality setting. I've got the game running at around 60 frames a second. There is actually some overshoot around the tree there and the flag post, but it isn't strong or extreme overshoot. And really the powdery trailing is not an issue here. The monitor's performing about as well as I'd expect from a 60Hz monitor, so the pixel responses aren't really a limiting factor, that's what I'm trying to say. Now with that balance setting, the overshoot is a lot stronger. I definitely would consider picture quality the preferable option here at these kind of refresh rates, because the overshoot really does have some quite eye-catching examples. You might have noticed then my refresh rate just seemed to jump up very high, and that's this LFC or frame to refresh multiplication technology in action, because occasionally it goes below the floor of operation, which is 60Hz at the moment because I'm using my NVIDIA GPU. Sometimes it seems to go to 58 or 57, but it's a bit inconsistent. Usually if it goes below 60 frames a second, it'll jump up and double at least the refresh rate. This monitor also offers an alternative to adaptive sync, or just an alternative to its normal flicker-free operation if you prefer, and that is a strobe backlight setting called aim stabilizer. That's explored in the written review. It isn't a nice setting to explore in video form because all you see is strobing of the monitor, flickering of the monitor. The backlight is matching the refresh rate of the display with its strobing frequency. You can't use that at the same time as adaptive sync. You really need the frame rate to be matching that refresh rate exactly for the technology to work without horrendous, obvious stuttering. And there are plenty of other issues with it. Again, refer to the written review. It isn't a very good strobe backlight implementation. To wrap up then, the monitor's well built, offers good ergonomic flexibility, and I like the powder-coated metal stand. I know the gain redesign doesn't appeal to everyone. It has quite sharp angles and that kind of thing, but it doesn't have any particularly colourful elements, except if you're using the RGB LED lighting, but you can only see that from the back. The screen size and the resolution offers a good pixel density, good amount of desktop real estate, quite agreeable for both work and play purposes to most people. In terms of its contrast performance, the monitor performed largely as I'd expect. I mean, it was largely in line with the specifications really. Static contrast was a touch below 1000:1 following the adjustments made to my test settings, but I was quite pleased to see some more subdued IPS glow than I'd usually see. So that was a bit of a bonus, but that doesn't mean it's going to give you a nice deep atmospheric experience where darker shades are concerned. For brighter shades, the screen surface, light to very light matte, that's how I'd classify it. It doesn't impede the image anywhere near as much as some matte screen surfaces, so it doesn't have the same layered appearance in front of the image, it doesn't have the same effect on vibrancy and clarity, and the relatively smooth finish to the screen surface kept it free from clear graininess. In terms of colour reproduction, the monitor offered strong consistency from its IPS type panel. It also offers a generous colour gamut extending well beyond sRGB and actually coinciding rather closely to Adobe RGB. So this did offer extra saturation for standard sRGB content. Some users will like this look, others not so much. It did offer an sRGB emulation setting if you want to subdue things, tone things down, make things look perhaps a bit more as the developers intend, but really that took things a bit far on this model and made things a bit undersaturated. It's still nice to see that mode at least, and the flexibility was there in terms of adjusting the brightness, which is more than can be said for some models with such a setting. In terms of HDR, it's really lower rung in terms of the support there. The VESA DisplayHDR 400 doesn't offer local dimming, doesn't have any contrast advantage when using HDR, although it did at least use dynamic contrast, which could respond to HDR metadata, and that allowed it to give a bit more of an atmospheric look to scenes which were very dark or predominantly dark, compared to models which just have their backlight at full brightness under HDR, and some do that, and I find that quite annoying. So it was nice to have it not doing that, but no substitute for local dimming, certainly not. The peak luminance as well wasn't outstanding at all by HDR standards, a little bit above 400 candles per meter squared. I thought the colour reproduction was quite good under HDR though. The monitor doesn't fully cover DCI P3, which is the short-term or near-term target for HDR, although it does actually offer some extension beyond that in some regions, and the overall coverage is 94%, and particularly in the green regions because it's really close to Adobe RGB. Those shades showed good vibrancy under HDR, and they had quite a natural look compared to what they had under SDR. So under SDR, some green shades, they just looked quite off. Deep greens didn't look as deep and lush as they should. They looked a touch neon. Yellowish greens had their yellow components brought out too strongly. Under HDR, that was subdued, but things had a good lush, deep look where they should, but there were some nice bright greens where they were intended. Things just looked better balanced in that respect. In terms of other shades as well, good vibrancy where it was wanted, but toned down saturation where the shade should be more muted, more pastel, and they looked more neutral as a result. I was quite impressed by the responsiveness of the monitor. It offered a very low input lag, very low signal delay. It put the 240Hz refresh rate to good use as well, with well-tuned pixel responses using my preferred balance setting, and the speed setting for those who want to use it. Give us a slight edge there, but introduced a bit of overshoot in places as well. At lower refresh rates, you would perhaps consider using the picture quality setting, particularly at very low refresh rates, let's say 60 Hz. And I say very low, I mean relative to the maximum of the monitor. But of course it would have been preferable to just have one setting you could set and forget, but that wasn't what was offered here. Although some users might be quite happy to just use one setting all the time. Really just depends on personal preferences in that respect. Adaptive sync worked well with both my NVIDIA and AMD GPUs, that was nice to see as well. So overall, I feel this monitor gives a good enough pixel response performance to be considered for competitive gaming at high refresh rates. The fact that adaptive sync worked well meant that it could be used for more casual gaming as well at lower refresh rates. And I know that some users will play a mixture of different types of game titles and they'll get a mixture of different frame rates as well, and that's really what this monitor is well suited for. Of course, some things I would have liked to see. Variable overdrive would be nice, or just one setting which can be used throughout the variable refresh rate range. An RGB subpixel layout would have been preferable as well, although again I stress that only a minority of users would have an issue with this, and indeed I have received a lot of feedback from the Gigabyte M27Q, which has the same thing, and the vast majority of users don't notice it or don't have an issue with it. I also thought the colour gamut, being close to Adobe RGB, made it quite suitable for work within that colour space as well, and the fact that it supports 10 bits per subpixel at 200 Hz was nice. It would have been nice to have that all the way up to 240 Hz for those that want to use that, but it's still a good flexibility to have. I've actually got a post comparing this monitor based on my review findings to the Dell Alienware AW2721D, which isn't a model I've reviewed, but it is one I've received a lot of feedback on, and it's been actually positive feedback, most of it, I have to say, and that I've just seen a lot of data from other reviewers on. So I've got a good flavour of what to expect from the Dell Alienware, so I've drawn up a little comparison. I'll link to that in the comments section. There's also a bit of user feedback there, and it also has some feedback on the Acer models and some thoughts I've shared on those. But really, looking at this model in isolation, I do like what it offers. I think it is going to give an experience that people are going to really like, especially if they like strong responsiveness and vibrant colour output. So that's really all there is to the Gigabyte AORUS FI27Q-X. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.